Hello friends, welcome to CEC Gurukul live lectures. Dear friends, today in this session we are going to talk in our series on Indian philosophy. Our topic of discussion is theories of error in classical Indian philosophy, and for the discussion on the topic we have with us in our studios Dr. Ajay Verma. Dr. Ajay Verma is Associate Professor in Center for Philosophy, School of Social Sciences, JNU. Dr. Ajay Verma is a keen observer. He observes from the society as well as through the theoretical perspectives. He explains you different aspects in detail. Friends, if you wish to ask questions from Dr. Ajay Verma on today's topic, feel free to talk to us through our toll-free number. Our number is 1-800-110-430. Number is 1-800-110-430. Dear friends, this is the second lecture in this series, and we had a vivacious session earlier also on the following topic. So I would request Dr. Ajay Verma to explain us in detail and kindly explain us from the point where we left in the previous session. Hello sir, welcome to the lecture.
Thank you, Kirika. Hello viewers. So as already told to you by Ms. Kirika, that we would be continuing with the last lecture, and just to quickly recapitulate what were the different topics we covered in our last lectures on different theories of error in classical Indian philosophy. We would remember that we had basically discussed why theorizing error is important in philosophy. So, I mean, in other words, what is the philosophical importance of error? And there we discussed that there are several issues involved, in the case of error. First being that it's something opposite of knowledge. Knowledge is generally defined as justified true belief. And we know that in the cases of error, errors don't, erroneous cognitions don't give us a kind of a correct picture, a right picture of what, the cognition is otherwise supposed to be representative of. So these were some of the and also as a part of the earlier discussion, we found that depending on what kind of epistemological take on cognitive issues that we might have, we would have different challenges coming to us from erroneous cognitions. Say for example, if you are a realist, then since the realist, a realist believes that things present themselves to us as they actually are. So a realist of the Nyaya variety, would believe that things, are presented to us in their true nature as they actually are. So then the question would arise, how can it ever happen that even though there's nothing wrong with the presentation of the things, the presentation of an object, the givenness of an object, then how come errors still occur? Because and it will be a challenging task for them, because the idealist would always be happy with with such situations, in the sense that there is no certain kind of a point that idealist is able to prove from such situations, and the point being that all that we have access to at any given point of time is our sensory perception. And sensory perception, doesn't bear any kind of stamp of objectivity, so to speak. It doesn't have any stamp, on it, which would, on the basis of which we could once and for all say that there's an objective world from where this sense data is coming. If things could be otherwise than as they are given to us in our sense data, that means there is no absolutely certain kind of association between the so-called object and the sensory data that we receive supposedly therefrom. So, from depending on whether you are taking an idealist perspective or a realist perspective, there are different kind of challenges that that are posed before the philosopher concerned. If you talk from the point of view of idealists, then the challenge before them would be that we call a particular situation to be an error, to be a situation of error, only when there is some kind of a sublation happening, thereof. So, say for example, right now, if certain thing appears to be as a chair to me, it wouldn't be deemed as an erroneous cognition until and unless this cognition is sublated by another cognition which supposedly correctly tells us about the actual nature of the object. So, say for example, at a later point I come to know that no, it's not a chair, but maybe some kind of a cardboard placed somewhere, or there are several examples, a snake rope example, silver and oyster shell example. So unless and until there is a kind of a contrary cognition, say for example the case of snake and rope, until and unless there is another cognition there, whereby we come to know that what we see at a given moment is not a snake but a rope, we don't come to realize that our cognition was hitherto an erroneous cognition. So, now, what's the challenge? We might ask, what's the challenge here that idealist has to face? Now, the challenge before the idealist here would be that since our cognitions later on are proved to be not carrying, so to speak, truth with them. Therefore, somebody could validly argue that since we come to know that what was recognized, what was cognized was actually not the case in the world, since there was some kind of a sublation that happened, because error means we call a cognition error only when we come to know the actual state of affairs, only when we come to know that what we were seeing as snake was actually only a rope. Unless that happens, we wouldn't even know that our cognition was erroneous. But on idealist account, if there is no external world, then there may not be any sublation, any correction, so to speak, of our given cognition of something. But since such kind of sublations happen, and only when such kind of corrections, sublations happen, that we call a given cognition as erroneous cognition, therefore idealist has a challenge before her, in the sense that means there is some point of reference of truth in the objective world, in the world out there, vis-a-vis which our cognitions stand to corrections many a times. So, very briefly speaking, these were some of the main philosophical issues that we discussed in our last chapter, some of the important philosophical issues that we discussed in our last lecture. Now, having said that, in this lecture, we would be, we will go further from where we left last time, and we would discuss different categorizations of error, different classifications of error done by different philosophers on different bases. But first of all, let's look again at what in the first place we actually mean by a case of error, or viparyaya as it is called in Sanskrit in most the texts on Indian classical Indian philosophy. So now the question that arises before us is, what is vapor AI? Before we discuss the error and its types, we must first of all try to get some kind of a very general definition of what we generally mean by a case of error or vapor AI. Now, Shankar defines it very tersely but clearly enough as a cognition of thatness in something other than that. So, the sort of word for that would be idam. So, our sort of statements are often of the form, this is a snake or this is a piece of silver. Now, thisness of the thing. So, if in an erroneous cognition, there is a cognition of thisness in something other than that. So, what we actually cognize as silver, this to be a case of silver, actually does not fit well with the thisness, which is the givenness of the thing. So, when something other than the thing itself is attributed to the thisness, to the givenness, to the sense data that is coming to us, in those cases the error is supposed to have taken place. So Shankara very sort of tersely, very in very sort of few words, defines it as a cognition of thatness in something other than that. Also, other than that, let's also look at some of the other terms, other terminology that is very often used for error, for the cases of error in Indian philosophy. Another term that is used for error, apart from vipriya, is Brahm. So, cognition which does not reflect the true nature of its object could also be called Brahm, which could be mainly of two types. In some cases of error, there is an objective basis to what is perceived, that is conch shell and silver. So cognition, Brahm basically refers to cognition of something which does not reflect the true nature of this object. And thereby, it is called Brahma. So even though vipriya and Brahm are used synonymously, Brahm, gives us, from the literary point of view, if you look at the literary sort of current meaning of the word Brahm, because it's used in Hindi as well, it seems to refer to not only those cases which have objective basis, but also the cases of certain illusions which may not have any objective basis at all. It could also refer to cases of hallucinations. So the word Brahm, which even though used as a synonym of vipriya, there is a slight sort of difference of meaning between the use of the term, the meaning of the term Brahm and vipriya, though they are synonymously used. Vipriya, more or less, is taken to refer to those cases where a given object, something that is presented before us, is seen as something else. So, but it's generally taken to be like this. There are exceptions. But Brahm, sort of very broadly speaking, could refer, to both, this kind of cases which may have, sort of some kind of an objective basis or may not have some kind of objective basis. So Brahm could be of two types. In cases of error, there is often an objective basis to what is perceived. Say, for example, conch shell and silver. So actually we do have some object which is of a nature otherwise than as it is perceived. but there is some given object before us. So say, for example, in the case of oyster shell and silver, or conch shell and silver, there is a kind of an object that's presented before us, namely conch shell or oyster shell, and it is perceived as something which it is not. So we sort of though at the same time we must understand here that the presentative character of the object, the givenness of the object, cannot be put into question here. The givenness of the object is actually as it is. So there is no conch shell is presenting itself as it actually is. So we cannot say that there is some kind of an effort on the part of conch shell to masquerade as something else, or there is an effort on the part of oyster shell to hide it, to actually hide its true nature and appear as something else. This question becomes even more important if we look at some of the Advaitian traditions, where there are several aphorisms in Vedas and later texts where the plurality in our appearance is put into question, and the plurality is explained away as illusion and non-dualistic aspect of reality is emphasized over plurality, which is only apparent, which is only sort of elusive in character. So the point here is, in some cases of error, there is some objective basis to what is perceived. So there is actually some given object, even though that object is perceived as it is not. That object is perceived otherwise than it actually is. So there could be such kind of cases where there is an actual object before us, which is sort of presented to us and is viewed as something else. And such cases are known as Salamban Brahman. Alamban meaning there is some kind of a basis to it, so meaning with. So these are the cases of Brahma, or illusions or error, which have some kind of an alamban, which have some kind of sort of basis to it, phenomenological and sort of some kind of sort of givenness, external givenness to us. And but apart from that, there are some cases of perception. Some cases of perception may have no objective basis at all, as in the cases of hallucination. Such cases are categorized as niralamban Brahma. Vipriya refers to the first kind of faulty perception, even though as a term it is often used synonymously with illusion or hallucination, but it mainly refers to errors of perception of any variety, erroneous perception of any variety. So, as must be clear from it, there can be there could be sort of very broadly two main division, of different kind of sort of errors, which also differentiates in a certain way between the word Brahma, which is used for the cases of error, and the word Vipriya, which is another word used for error. So, Brahm could be of two types, as pointed out. One with objective basis, another which is called nir alamban. Nir meaning without, alamban meaning some kind of phenomenal basis, some kind of sort of givenness of something. So there could be, salamban means some objective basis behind what is perceived, and nir alamban Brahma meaning cognition, which is without any objective basis. See, for example, hallucinations. In cases of hallucinations, somebody may see something which doesn't have even some kind of a similarity to something that is existing before us. So only the cases of Salamban Brahma are generally referred to as vipriae, whereas the other variety is not referred to as vipriae, even though the term is often used synonymously with illusion. So cases of hallucinations do not have any objective basis in the sense that when we talk about Salamban Brahma, often if you look at, so to speak, the broad contours of such kind of erroneous cognitions, we'll find that what happens is something is cognized as something else, and both something that is cognized and it's being cognized as something else, what it is not. Both of them are separately real. So, say for example, the given object that is presented before us could be an oyster shell, but it is viewed. It happens to be perceived as silver, but silver is real, and oyster shell is also real. It's just that silver exists elsewhere. Silver is not something that is non-existent altogether, because we cannot perceive something which is non-existent altogether. So what happens in Salamban cases is that very often there is some kind of visual property, which lends itself to visual perception, very often visual perception, though errors are not confined to visual perception alone. So, one of the examples that comes to mind is, there could be at times even erroneous auditory, cognitions. Say, for example, the famous, incident that's cited in Ramayana, where one of the kings, happens to kill the Shravan, who's taking both of his visually challenged parents for a pilgrimage. So what happens there is some kind of auditory perception as of some deer drinking water. So, since now the king Dashratha was a very apt, very trained shooter of the arrow. Just on the basis of where the noise was coming from, he could shoot an arrow. So there could be cases of erroneous auditory perceptions as well, even though almost all the cases described in classical Indian philosophical text are only those of visual, erroneous cognitions. Now, having said that, the point that that we are discussing here is that in Salamban Brahma, what generally happens is that something is cognized as something else. So thisness, gets associated with not the actual givenness of the object, but as something else which is not there and now. So what happens here is that two objects, say for example conch shell and the silver, they share a property, some kind of a property which is given to our visual field, which is shared by both of those objects. So say for example some kind of particular type of color, silvery gray color, a particular kind of a sheen, particular kind of shining that often is seen in silver, is also present on the inner side of the oyster shell, and from a distance both look very similar. So since there is this similarity between the two, what happens is, on the basis of property, of a particular property, say for example this particular kind of silvery grey that is presented before us, on the basis of that, to the thisness, referring to the sense data that we are receiving, to this thisness, something else which is also associated with this property of silveriness gets associated to the here and now of thisness. And this is where the problem occurs. This is what makes the given cognition an erroneous case of cognition. But we have something, we have some object which is otherwise, which is of a different nature, as which is different from as it is seen, but there is some actual object presented before us. Whereas in Niralamban Brahma, there is no object presented before us. So, say for example, somebody actually, in one of the Indian philosophical texts, the example given is that somebody happened to see somebody hallucinating the presence of somebody, some beloved, which is far removed in another sort of space and time from the lover. So, this sort of pangs of longing, this sort of, longing in the lover makes him see his beloved where she is not. So, like a kind of a case of hallucination. So this is how certain sort of classification is made on the basis of objective basis of the givenness of an object which is mistaken for something else. So this is one kind of categorization of different cases of error. We'll come back to this when we discuss Nayayika's take on the issue in a slightly more detail. Now, apart from Vipraya, we saw the difference between, another term, Brahma, that is used for the case of error. We saw the difference between Brahma and Vipraya. Now, there is yet another term which is used for error, which is popularly now is used for error, which is Khyati. So another important term which is even more popularly used for erroneous perception is Khyati, which literally means cognition. As a result, different theories of illusion eventually came to be known as Khyativad. Even though now it is sort of interesting, it is a queer case to understand that even though the term Khyati does not necessarily mean an erroneous cognition, it only means some cognition, but the term Khyati has eventually come to be associated with error, so much so that different theories of illusion or different theories of error now are referred to by the term Khyativad. But there's not too much to say on the term Khyati, because the term Khyati is like almost sort of tantamount to it's almost sort of synonymous with the term. With the other two terms, and we wouldn't sort of really focus upon how sort of this term carries some kind of sort of this term is different from has a different connotation from other terms, but there are certain other issues, certain other epistemological and ontological issues that make the discussion of error, sort of important and interesting for us. One of those issues is that cases of error are also in those cases where, so to speak, the ontological issues get involved with epistemological issues in certain ways. Because, as pointed out earlier, there are certain important questions that should be considered. Say, for example, when we call something to be chair, is the chairness of the chair given to us in our sense perception? If yes, then we could say, well, the chairness of the chair has some kind of givenness in the phenomenological givenness of it. So, if we look at the phenomenal experience, then it bears some kind of a stamp of chairness. It bears some kind of a stamp upon it regarding what does that sense data belong to. Now, as opposed to that, there could be another take on the issue where somebody could argue that the givenness of something, the phenomenal character of experience is neutral to the so-called actual character of the object concerned. Meaning thereby that when we say this is chair, this refers to the pure phenomenal experience of the thing concerned. And the thisness of the thing, is not sort of claiming to be this way or that. It's a very, very initial kind of a claim of givenness of an object. So what we mean here is that the simple givenness characterized by so to speak the term this, which could be just a term of referring to an object. So when we say this, we doesn't mean this chair or this table. This is a term which is neutral to the term to that object that the term this is actually referring to, which means that thisness of an object is neutral to what kind of an object it is referring to. So the point here that we we want to understand here is there is a certain set of philosophers who would point out that the givenness of the object, the phenomenal experience of an object is value neutral, is neutral to what the nature of the object is, where from supposedly it is coming from. It is so the sense data is neutral to where it is supposedly originating from. And as we can understand, idealist philosophers who believe that there is no conclusive argument to prove that there is some kind of an objective world out there. So such kind of arguments are more likely to be given, to be offered by the idealists. And not so much from non-idealist camps. So therefore, such kind of arguments are basically used by Buddhist Vijnanvadins or Buddhist idealists as far as classical Indian philosophy is concerned. There are two different terms that are used, to refer to, so to speak, the imagined, character of conceptualizing a given sense data, and these words are kalpana or vikalpa. As has been earlier pointed out also, the definition of perception as offered by Dignaga is very small, which is pratyaksham kalpana podham. Perception is something that is devoid of kalpana, that is devoid of any construction, any constructive role played on the part of the mind. So they think, that is the Buddhist logicians think, that perception refers to only the pure thisness of our experience. So the moment we conceptualize it, the conceptualization has, according to them, no objective basis. It is a mere constructive role played by the mind. We construct, we conceptualize the sense data this way or that way. So what is given, in a certain situation, say for example, is a certain kind of color character. Say for example, in the case of oyster shell and silver, there is a particular kind of color that happens to be seen by a particular subject, by a particular knower, and then according to Buddhists, it doesn't have, since sense data does not bear any stamp upon it of any object where it is supposedly coming from. So therefore, the moment we ascribe this color to this object, to that object, the moment we think of this color as a property of some substance which has some kind of essence in it, some kind of its own character in it. The moment we think like that, it is only, it has no objective basis, but it is only a kind of a construction on the part of the mind. So the moment we think of the silveriness as a part of a given object, this is a mere construction on the part of the mind. So mind works with concepts. Mind, the main role of the mind is to construct further upon the sensory data this way or that. So so far as mind is not playing that role in a given case of perception, we could think of that particular sensory experience as a case of perception. The moment we ascribe certain kind of other properties, like as if that sense data is coming from somewhere, it refers to the property of an object and so on and so forth. This is only the working of the mind, merely imagination on the part of the mind, mainly vikalpas, so to speak, the constructions that the mind makes, so to speak, and thereby conceptualizes the given sense data in certain ways. So kalpana or vikalpa are the terms used a lot by Buddhist logicians, and they are used more or less synonymously. Though as far as the literary meaning is concerned, there is a slight shade of difference between the two. So kalpana or vikalpa are terms used a lot by Buddhist logicians which refer to conceptualized cognitive content. These are, on Buddhist definition, subjective constructions or a figment of imagination, and therefore is claimed to have no objective basis. Important presumption behind such epistemological stance or such epistemological claims is that a cognitive content is concept neutral, though it lends itself to constructive tendencies of mind. So cognitive content, so to speak, just the content of perception is concept neutral. It's not saying that the object is this or that. It's neutral to any such kind of claims about the substance or about an object, and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, this content, this perceptual content, becomes a kind of an object for the mind to further build upon that. So it lends itself, so to speak, to constructive tendencies of mind, whereby we form certain kind of knowledge claims about that. And the only truth there could be behind those knowledge claims could be sort of analyzed further on Buddhist account only on the basis of the practical utility of a given claim. But practical utility is not so to speak, tantamount to truth. It's just that, those could be practically sort of useful for us, and thereby, we could say that maybe there is some kind of object is, presenting itself to us in a certain way in our in our perceptual content, that that object, from our perspective, we conceptualize it in a certain way, that our conceptualization could be practically useful. So it's not that the way we conceptualize an object is completely it could be completely this way or that way. From the point of view of practical utility, there could be certain judgments which could be more useful, and there could be certain other judgments which could be less useful or which may not be useful at all. So this is how Buddhist logicians are not such kind of thoroughgoing idealists, which Vijnanavadi Buddhists are. So this is how Buddhist logicians look at the perceptual content. So, but the point here is that could we say, therefore, that the term kalpana or vikalp as used by Buddhists is some kind of a parallel of the term viparya, or could we say that for them all potential cases of all knowledge judgments are basically cases of viparya, except for the fact that some of them could be more useful than certain others. Now, when we when we look into that direction, then we find that the reason why vikalpas or kalpana are not cases of error. So these are not cases of error. The kalpana and vikalpa is is a very different kind of idea in epistemological idea. So the reason why vikalpas or kalpana are not cases of error is because there is no sublation in their cases. They are a part of phenomenal experience at practical level. So, the point here is that if we look at all judgments as, some kind of constructions done by mind upon value neutral perceptual content, in that case we can't talk of sublation. We can't say that, well, something was wrongly perceived as something else. So here the only criteria would be that certain claims could be more useful than certain others. That's the only claim that we could make. But other than that, at epistemological level, since all conceptualized knowledge judgments are put under the rubric of under the category of inferences, so they are all cases of inferences. And cases of inferences could be true or false, depending upon their practical usefulness. So there may not be, if we believe, if we think of vikalpas and kalpana as counterparts of viparya, then we don't have much reason to put them on the same platform. Because in the cases of viparya, something is deemed to be erroneous cognition only when our given cognition is sublated in favor of another more certain, more clear, more lucid kind of, some kind of, that kind of sensory perception later on. So this is how we see that there's a difference between Brahma and Viparya. There is there's another term that is used for the case of error, Khyati, and error or Viparya is also very different from the the meaning of the term Vikalpas and Kalpana, which form a very different epistemological category used by Buddhists. So now coming on to how realists would look at different kinds of error. As pointed out earlier, one of the main divisions that we have already talked about, which is Salamban Brahma and Niralamban Brahma, is this kind of categorization is made primarily by a famous we could say medieval, because Jayant this distinction is made by famous Nayayika Jayant Bhatta, who is the author of one of the main texts of Nyaya, namely Nyaya Manjari. So Jayant Bhatta divides the types of error as Salamban Brahma and Niralamban Brahma. The former has an objective basis, as earlier discussed, whereas the latter has no objective basis and therefore is excited, is sort of thought of as excited by some kind of internal mechanism of mind that could also be called hallucination. So this distinction between Salamban and Niralamban types of error is adhered to and is is also agreed upon by the famous Nayayika Jayant Bhatta. But now the important point is that Jayanta divides the former type of error, namely Salamban type of error, into two further categories. One having its origin in the external stimuli, which is deemed as Vishaya dosha, and the second as arising out of some defect in the peripheral sense organs. Peripheral, why we are saying peripheral? Because there is an internal sense organ also according to them, namely manas. So there could be errors. The Salamban errors could be of two types. One where there is something wrong in the external stimulus itself. So there the dosha, the problem, is in the vishaya, is in the object of perception. And in the other case called Indriya dosha, the dosha or the problem lies in the sense organ. There is no problem in the givenness of in the phenomenal experience of an object, whereas in Vishaya dosha there is some issue involved in the phenomenal givenness, phenomenal experience, the external stimuli coming forth from the Vishaya or the object. So the Alata Chakra is an example of the first type. It's an example of the Vishaya dosha, while the experience of a yellow conch shell due to jaundiced eye is an instance of the second type of error, namely Indriya dosha. Now, Alata Chakra, we need to understand what is the meaning of Alata Chakra. Alata Chakra is a kind of a circle formed by fire. What does it mean? What it means is that, say, suppose we have a kind of a torch in our hand. Earlier, sort of torch would mean something, sort of that you burn and make a torch out of that. But, even if you think of an electrical torch, if you sort of, move it into a circle in very quick succession with your hand, the person, sort of standing at some distance away from you would look at it as if it were a continuous circle of fire. So the different points in time of sort of sensory perception would not be actually observed by the knower. Another sense, another example which would be sort of more understandable to today's reader would be that of films. So today, we work with digital media, but earlier we used to have some kind of the imprints, the prints were taken on celluloid. So there were there used to be sort of different frames. Basically, there used to be these different photographs that they taken at different points of time, and when you roll them in very quick succession before a medium of light, medium of projection, then those sort of photographs are not seen as discrete series of photographs, distinct photographs, but are seen as if they were it was a movie. So this is these are the examples where the problem is with the givenness of the object. The object is given to us in such quick successions that we are not able to see the differences between them. So there is so to speak there is, so to speak, no bhed agraha. There is, sort of nothing, on the basis of which we would distinguish between the two movements. Such cases are referred to as the cases of Vishaya dosha, where there is some problem with the stimulus of the perception itself. Whereas there could be certain cases, there could be say for example something something wrong with the eye. Somebody may be seeing two objects instead of one, whereas or some like alternatively somebody may have jaundice, excess of bile because of some problem with the liver. So that excess of bile in the eye may make things appear as yellow. So even a conch shell may appear as yellow to that person. But in those cases, the problem lies with the sense organ of the knower concerned. In such cases, errors of such cases are supposed to be due to are supposed to be the cases of Indriya dosha. This is how Jayanta divides primarily. He divides the cases of errors as alamban and salamban and niralamban, and salamban cases are further divided into cases of Vishaya dosha or the cases of Indriya dosha. Now, Jayanta's classification, as can be seen, is based upon the possible differences in the nature of the causes. So this difference is made on the basis of the nature of the causes that excite, that cause erroneous perception. In cases of hallucination, there is an objective basis. There is no objective basis. There is no objective basis of perception, which is not. There is an objective basis of perception, which is not proximate at the moment. So, in cases of hallucination, we don't see something which doesn't never exist at all. It's just that in the case of hallucination, we see something which is not proximate. Say, for example, the example that was given earlier, somebody seeing his beloved here and now, though she is like far away, at some far away distance. So in case of hallucination, something is seen which has no objective basis in present and now. So such cases would be called hallucinations. Now, Sridhara, another Nayayika, who is the author of Nyaya Kandali, conceptualizes the same distinction in a slightly different way. He categorizes the peripherally excited errors into nirvikalpaka and savikalpaka. The former is due to malfunction of the peripheral sense organs, that is nirvikalpaka are due to malfunction of the peripheral sense organ, and therefore are presentative in character. Say, for example, yellowness of the conch shell as it appears to a jaundiced person. Whereas the latter type, meaning savikalpaka, is representative of some object before us. So like some object that's presented to before us is seen as something else. So that would be an example of such kind of error would be snake and rope. So Sridhara has a slightly different way of categorizing cases of error. Now one can observe here that this classification made by Sridhara is based upon the intrinsic nature or phenomenological character of erroneous cognition. So, the basis on which this distinction is being made by Sridhara is along a different line in comparison to Jayanta Bhatta. So here what he takes into account is the intrinsic nature or phenomenological character of erroneous cognition. So in the case of conch shell, there is some problem, there is some sort of something wrong with the sense organ whereby yellow color is projected which lies in the eyes onto the object, whereas in snake and rope example, something which is not there is invoked in our mind and seen as sort of as if existing here and now. So now further than that, erroneous cognitions may also be classified as sopadhic, that is resulting from some adventitious adjuncts, meaning apadhi, or proximate contaminating influences upon the presented sense data, say for example red crystal, and nirupadhic, such as which are contrary to that, say for example rope, snake, case of seeing a rope as a snake. So now there's another type of distinction which we would discuss in our next lecture. So this is it from our end for today. Until we meet you again next week. Thank you.
With this note, thank you so much for giving us this session. Friends, you are requested to write to us at info.cec@nic.in if you have any question in mind. We're taking your leave with the promise that we are going to meet again. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, sir. Thank you once again.